All right, new game. I have white and I'll start with the pawn to e4. He quickly plays c5, the Sicilian defense. I play knight to f3. The knight is there to support the d4 push. He takes, I retake, and he's playing very fast. He plays knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4, and I'll play knight c3 to defend it. He plays g6, the dragon, the Sicilian dragon. He wants to put the bishop on g7 and have it on the longest dark diagonal of the board. I'm going to play bishop to c4 to target the f7 pawn. He plays bishop to g7. I play bishop to e3, and I'm going to steer the game toward opposite side castling, just like in the first game. Except in the first game, it was my opponent who initiated opposite side castling. This time, I'm the one who's going to try to bring it about. He wants to do kingside castling, so I'll go for queenside castling. There's a fun little sequence to know, which is that if he plays knight g4, under the protection of the bishop to attack mine, I'll then play bishop b5 check. And if he puts a piece on d7 to shield his king, then the knight will now be undefended. But he did kingside castling. Now he's really threatening knight g4. So I'm going to play f3. That solidifies my e4 pawn and prevents him from playing knight g4. He plays knight c6, queen d2, and I'm preparing queenside castling. I'm putting my queen on d2 specifically on this square to pair the queen with my bishop for the possibility of going to h6. To remove his g7 bishop, which is a valuable defender but also a very strong attacker on the long dark diagonal. So this bishop on g7 is one of his best pieces. He plays e5, so he's making a huge mistake there, a terrible positional error. He just blocked his dark squared bishop on the diagonal and he's giving me the d5 square. Meaning that here I move the bishop back to e3 and this d5 square becomes weak. It's a square he can no longer defend with a pawn. The pawn on e5, well, it can't go back. So this square is a hole in the position, and a central hole where my pieces can establish themselves. So he plays bishop e6. He's being clever there, thinking that if I take, he'll retake with the pawn and defend the square. I don't want that, so I'm going to retreat to b3. Because he was threatening to take my bishop, you see. He plays rook c8. And I told you I wanted to steer the game toward opposite side castling. But now I'm thinking. Why am I thinking? Because I want to manage this square. I want to play on this square as well. But anyway, I said it, I'm going to do queenside castling. Besides, it's not bad because with queenside castling, the rook is immediately on the open file attacking the backward d6 pawn. Because the e5 push didn't just weaken the d5 square, it created a structural weakness on d6. The pawn on e5 is terrible, you see. He's playing against himself. This peon is scoring an own goal. It blocks the dark squared bishop's diagonal, and the pawn can't go to e6 to control the square, or to e7 to defend the pawn. So he's hindering his pieces, especially the g7 bishop, but at the same time he's also weakened the squares on the file where I have the most pressure. It's a semi-open file that's now available for my pieces to use. He played rook c6, in order to laterally defend the d6 pawn, trying to reinforce his position there. Now what happens if I attack his rook with bishop a4? Well, he won't be able to go to b6 if my dark squared bishop is already there. So instead, he'll have to go to a 6, which is a less active square for his piece. So at this point in the game, I have my bishop on b5, but his rook is able to move to a5. Honestly, I don't really think there's any way I can actually trap his rook, no matter what I try. Plus, I really need to keep my bishop in place so it can defend the pawn that's sitting on a2. Now, he manages to defend by moving his rook to c6, which is a pretty solid move. He's basically offering me the pawn that's on a7, but if I go ahead and take it, he immediately plays b6. He plays b6, and just like that, my bishop ends up completely trapped with no way out. So that's the situation I'm dealing with right now. Although bishop a6 could be interesting, and it's definitely a move to consider here, I have to think carefully about the consequences. His rook can no longer move along the 6th rank, which really changes the dynamics of the board. Yeah, I'm not sure what the best move is in this situation. I don't really want to take the pawn on a7 because if I remove pawns from the queen side, it opens up lines to attack my castled king as well. So, for now, I'll just play a little waiting move, giving myself a bit of time to see how things develop. King b1, moving away from the alignment with his rook, he takes on b3, so I retake with the a pawn on b3. And he plays a6. He surely wants to support the b5 push. Now I'm looking at bishop g5. Why this move? My bishop is well placed on e3, but I'm looking at bishop g5 to pin his knight and secure the d5 square for my own knight. So I'll play bishop g5. If he plays h6, I can take his pawn. I win a pawn. The queen and bishop are working together. You see, earlier I was ready to play bishop h6 to eliminate his dark squared bishop. But now I won't do it because since he played the pawn to e5, his dark squared bishop is no longer a threat to me. So I'll leave him that dark squared bishop. Its main diagonal is blocked by the pawn on e5. He plays queen c7, so we can already have a sequence starting with bishop takes, and knight d5, which will force the queen back to d8 to defend the bishop. And so I'll go for this sequence, because now I'll have a magnificent knight, impregnable on d5. It will dominate the position with all its possible attacks, you'll see. He's thinking now, but I don't know what about he has to take. Otherwise, he's just lost a piece for nothing. There it is, he takes. Knight d5. And look at my knight. All the squares it controls offensively and even defensively, impregnable on a light square. There's no pawn to chase it away, no more pawns to chase it. No light squared bishop, no knight. All he could do is try to eliminate it by sacrificing the rook. Now I'm very glad I moved my king from c1 to b1. I initially wanted to move it off the file, away from the alignment with his rook. But since I have no dark squared bishop, you see, if I had the king on c1, he could play a move like bishop g5 protected by the queen, and queen would be pinned. So finally, fortunately, now that's not happening. Now I'm looking at h4. h4 is clever. I want to play h5, of course, to destroy and open the file. We're in an opposite side castling attack where we must destroy the structure of pawns. But on h4, you'll tell me, the bishop can take, protected by the queen. But then I would play queen h6. I'd attack his bishop twice with my rook and queen, and if his bishop moves, queen takes h7 mate, protected by my rook. So I'm playing h4 to play h5. Now he might play h5 himself, but I'd look to play g4 to dismantle the black king's shelter. He takes, and I go into h6. If he moves, queen takes h7 mate. The only way he might have there, perhaps to not lose the piece immediately, is to play g5. But I'll play g3, and if the bishop leaves, queen takes h7 mate still. You see how quickly he went to take the pawn on h4? He thought it was a mistake. You must always first think, when the opponent gives you a pawn, is it a trap? Consider it a trap first before it's a mistake. And look to find out where the trap is, which he didn't look for at all. Even though he had more time than me, he rushed into taking the pawn. And now he has just resigned. All right, I have black. My opponent plays e4, and I'll play symmetrically. I'm always going to play e5. Knight f3, he attacks. Knight c6, we defend. Bishop c4, the Italian game. He's aiming at the f7 pawn. And so I'm not going to bring out the knight on f6. Why? Because that would block the defense of the g5 square for my queen. And he could play knight g5, so the knight joins the bishop in attacking the f7 pawn. I'm going to choose to play bishop c5. That way, on knight g5, I can take. Now, of course, I could have still played knight on f6, right? Because on knight g5, there are defenses. But inexperienced players often don't really know these defenses. So I prefer to show you the move bishop c5. On the other hand, he just played what's called the Evans Gambit. He plays b4. He offers me this pawn with the idea of playing c3, attacking my bishop to take the initiative, preparing the d4 push to attack the center. And when he plays c3, he even frees the b3 square for the queen, so the queen joins the bishop in attacking the f7 pawn. So it's a very dynamic and tactical move. It comes from Captain Evans, who invented this Evans Gambit b4. He was a sea captain, by the way. He learned to play chess on a ship. So I'm going to take, and then he'll play c3 against me. There's bishop f5, which is a common move, but I'm not going to play bishop f5. Why? I don't want to obstruct this square. I want to keep the possibility of playing knight f5 when his queen is on b3 to threaten forks at some point. Well, I know when the queen comes to b3, there'll be an immediate attack on f7, so I'll have to react to that. But here, I'll play bishop e7 instead, and when he plays queen b3, I'll have to react to f7. And how to react, I don't know. Because if I play knight h6, he'll push the pawn to do bishop takes knight, actually, right? but I'll have time to play knight a5. You see bishop e7, queen b3, knight h6. He pushes his d-pawn, but knight a5 to take his light-squared bishop. Maybe I should play bishop d6 as well. Because on queen b3, I haven't blocked the e7 square. I could play queen e7 to defend the pawn on f7. That might be a better way. Plus, I defend e5 and I'll have knight a5 later. Listen, I'll play bishop d6. I don't know this position very well. He plays pawn d4. So here, bishop d6 allows me to hold the pawn on e5 well. And I'll play knight f6. I attack his pawn on e4, but I'm aware he'll come and pin me with bishop g5. It's quite interesting, actually. He's playing very aggressively and really putting me in a tough spot in this Evans gambit, for which, honestly, I'm not very well prepared after all. You see what I mean? I don't know exactly what to play. I have some basic ideas, some notions, but right now I'm on my own. So if he plays bishop g5 to pin me, I think I'll play h6, attacking his bishop. If he retreats to h4, g5, attacking his bishop. And if he goes to g3, I take on e4, still attacking his bishop. Then on bishop g5, I can also just castle, right? But then I'd have more trouble chasing his bishop with h6, bishop h4 and g5, because since I'd have done kingside castling, it's the pawns that are supposed to cover my king that I'm sending into battle. Here I can still hope to do queenside castling. Well, it certainly won't be easy. In reality, I honestly don't know what hopes I really have in this position because his pawn's center is extremely strong. But then I know why I'm suffering. I'm suffering because I have an extra pawn after all. So he has to manage to convert his center advantage into a material gain at some point. And here he leaves me the pawn on e4. But will I take it? Because after that, he wants to play rook e1, actually, right? Attacking my knight and opening the file, and there's no shortage of targets. My unprotected knight, the pawn on e5, the king, it's going to be very hard. So knight takes e4, rook e1. I can go take the c3 pawn, but his knight defends, so it's not possible. Knight takes e4, rook e1. I can try to defend with f5, but the bishop has the open diagonal. I wouldn't be able to do castling anymore. No, that's no good. I think taking on e4 doesn't work at all here, actually. When you take on e4, you have to be able to play d5 if your knight is attacked, which I can't do. I have the bishop on d6. So now I might play h6 instead to prevent him from planting a bishop on g5. So I play h6, I'll prepare kingside castling, and I won't have to worry about bishop g5 anymore. If he plays queen b3 to attack f7, we said queen e7 to defend f7, and at the same time the queen will defend e5 well. He takes on e5. So here the knight takes back, and I attack his pieces. Finally, if he takes me, I take back with the bishop, which will unblock the d-pawn and then unblock the bishop. And there, he unblocks everything for me. He unblocks everything. But now he's going to send 4. That's what he was looking for, actually. I didn't see it. f4, bishop d6, e5, the fork. But fortunately, I have bishop c5 check. But his attack is still terrible on my castling. So bishop c5 check, because after my knight, I don't know where to put it. And watch out if my knight moves. He has moves like bishop takes f7 check, king takes, queen d5 fork, and he takes the bishop having recovered his pawn. So here, I'm even looking at the d5 push, actually. The d5 push that takes my knight, I take his bishop, he can uncastle me, win the g7 pawn, but maybe without the queens on the board, I'd still be more comfortable. Otherwise, I have to look at knight e4, which threatens entries on f2. But after knight moves to e4, he can still do bishop takes f7 check, then king takes, and after that, queen check follows. I move, and then I take my knight on e4. Not to mention that on knight e4, even queen d5 is a really strong move because of the attack on my knight and the ongoing mate threat. Yeah, I'm in very, very big trouble here, honestly, and it's hard to see a way out. I'm going to send the d5 pawn, hoping for some kind of counterplay. But honestly, my position is looking extremely difficult, and I'm running out of good options. It's a tough spot, and I have to be very careful with every move from here on out. I'm going to give up quite a lot of pawns here, but I'm really looking for the take-take variation and just trying to get out of it. He might even play rook e1 against me, maybe. Now he takes on g7, and that changes things a bit. I'm going to exchange the queens. Oh no, he's going to take, he's going to take my rook with check. So I'm going to play rook g8. If he does rook e1 check, I have bishop e6 anyway, but he has f5, the attack on the pin. Fortunately, I'm getting out of it just in time. The g7 pawn, I'll try to get it back. He might play 5 so that the bishop attacks h6 and play f6, which means I have to take the g7 pawn right away. He's going to take the h6 pawn. There, I'll play rook h7, attack his bishop. Behind that, there might be attacks on h2. I have a light squared bishop. He doesn't. And I'm going to... He's checking me, though. He's checking me. I'm going to play king e8. He didn't see that coming, so now I'll take with check, which puts pressure on his position. After that, he'll go to g1, moving his king to a safer square. Then I'll go here and attack his bishop, putting it under threat. He can take with check, and then pawn takes back, recapturing and keeping things balanced. He gives me a check, so I move away to a safer spot. Even after all these moves, his bishop is still under attack, so he has to retreat it. Each step keeps the pressure on him, and he has to keep defending. And I'm going to play bishop c5 check here, which puts my opponent in check and forces him to respond. He's offering an exchange with this move, so I'll go ahead and exchange pieces here. After that, I'll use my light squared bishop to control some important squares on the board and improve my position. Bishop d7, and then maybe bishop c6, perhaps. He puts his knight right there. Bishop d7 again, and he took back with the knight in order to defend the f5 square. He goes there and attacks the c7 pawn. He's attacking a lot of things. I'll play bishop c6. I'm letting him take the pawn on c7. I'm going to bring my rook onto the second rank, attack g2. I have a light squared bishop. He doesn't. I need to attack on the light squares and try to infiltrate the second rank. If the pawn moves forward, I have rook h1 check with the bishop also protecting. For example, rook d2 if he moves his pawn, rook h1 mate, or even rook g2 mate for that matter. So you see, there are still attacking possibilities, but he played very aggressively, and I think I was completely lost in this game. So after he gives a check, I simply take and then take again. There will be another check coming up, and then I move my king. He'll probably give yet another check, but honestly, it's fine, actually. I can just take, and there's really nothing to worry about here. There. He'll give me a check, true, but I'll go to d6. If he checks me, I take the pawn and attack the other rook. So even if he takes the rook on d8, I don't think his plan works. There, I'm attacking his rook right here. And so now, as a result, he's a piece down. And in addition to that, both his rooks are currently under attack as well. There, he's a piece down, and the g-pawn is very weak. In fact, all his pawns are weak. I'm going to attack the a-pawn and then attack the g-pawn like that. He checks me, I move closer to his rook. There you go, just like that. And he resigns. So my opponent completely crushed me in his opening, this Evans Gambit opening. But you shouldn't miss the chance to learn a good lesson, and it's true that I should have lost. So we're going to look at how to counter this Evans Gambit, but we'll also look at all the potential of this Evans Gambit. This will be an opportunity to enrich this video thanks to my opponent. So he played e4, I play e5. He plays knight f3, attacking the central pawn. I play knight c6 to defend. And here he puts the bishop on c4, typical of the Italian opening, where the bishop targets the f7 pawn. You have to be very careful about this pawn. And what's going to happen is interesting because one of the main moves is to play knight f6, which is called the two knights defense here. But when you play knight f6, you allow the knight on f3 to come to g5 since the queen no longer controls that square. And white can try what's called the fried liver attack, the attack on f7. It's entirely possible to counter this attack with black. But I was explaining that inexperienced players have great difficulty defending themselves. I know exactly how to defend myself, of course, against this attack. But I didn't want to take you down that path so that you wouldn't find yourselves in trouble in your own games. And that's what's very funny. I'm inviting you instead to play bishop c5 so that the knight can't access the g5 square because the queen controls it. And I wanted to show you a quieter game on bishop c5. Except it was exactly the opposite. My opponent plays b4, the Evans Gambit, and what happens in the game is worse than what you would have seen in the Fegatello attack with knight g5 in the end. It's going to be very fun. So here you have to take the pawn. So I took it. But what's the idea behind this Evans Gambit? I explained it a bit in the game. It's to lure the bishop to be able to play c3 with a gain of time, meaning gaining a move since the pawn goes to c3 while attacking the bishop. And the c3 pawn can support the d4 push to conquer the center. And playing the pawn to c3 frees up the b3 square for the queen, which can join the bishop in attacking the f7 pawn. So at the cost of a pawn of this pawn gambit, white seizes the initiative to have a rapid and aggressive development. And so the main move here is to retreat the bishop to a5. However, I didn't want to get into the main line because main lines are often well known by players, especially when they play such gambits against you. They generally know the moves of the main lines by heart, and I wanted to move towards a secondary variation. And I remember that bishop e7 had actually been played by several different players whose games I had seen or studied. But there, I had just a little bit of hesitation with this bishop move to e7. I played bishop d6 as a reminder, but bishop e7 is very good. And later we'll come back to bishop d6 to understand what my mistake was afterwards. Because in reality, with bishop d6, I can still hold the position. But bishop e7, why didn't I play that? As you heard in my calculations, I started to hesitate over queen b3, thinking that it attacks f7. To defend, you have to play knight h6, but white can play d4, threatening to take the knight with the attack on f7. I calculated knight f5 anyway to attack the queen, which can come to b5. Knight takes c4, bishop takes h6, and I stopped at this position in my calculations, thinking that it's still a bit tricky. The knight is attacked, the e5 pawn is attacked 3 times, so the c4 knight is attacked once. As for the bishop on h6, it attacks the g7 pawn. If I take it, destroys my castling, and I thought, no, this isn't a good position for black. In reality, it's a very interesting position for black. You have to take the bishop on h6, so you lose on c4, and then play d6 to free the light-squared bishop, because that's the one it's about. It's true, when you look at this position, you might think white has the center, 2 central pawns. The pawn on e5 is attacked twice. The black king seems to lack shelter after kingside castling. So you'd think this position is better for white, even if white is a pawn down. There are doubled pawns here, a fragile structure for black. But in reality, it's a very promising position for black, especially if white starts taking on e5, which is understandable, because after the takes, there would be takes on e5 with attacks on f7. But here, look at what could happen. Rook g8. The rook takes the file to attack g2, attacking the pawn that will defend the light squares on the king side. And if this pawn advances or is destroyed, it benefits the bishop of white squares. For example, if white does kingside castling, bishop h3, exploiting the pin. And if the pawn advances, it loses the rook. And if white doesn't want to do kingside castling, but plays g3, then bishop h3, the bishop controls the f1 square. The king will never be able to do kingside castling again. The bishop can enter on g2, attacking the rook and the knight. And in reality, white will have as many problems as black in securing their king, even with more problems. The computer prefers black here. It gives a small advantage to black. So in my game, on the move c3, I could have retreated to e7, and I advise you to do it in any case. If there's queen b3, you play knight h6. On the push d4, you play knight f5 to eliminate the bishop of light squares. You eliminate the bishop of light squares. And on bishop takes knight, you take. Then you play d6 with the idea of putting the rook on. g8, attack g2, so that the bishop can then rush into h3. And the white king will find no rest in the position. He won't find a safe shelter. But in the game, as you saw, I played bishop d6. So where was my decisive error? Because bishop d6 still holds. He plays d4. I choose to play knight to f6. If he plays knight g5 to attack the f7 pawn, I can do kingside castling with the rook coming to defend. Well, it's a close call. If he plays bishop g5, h6 is very good. Bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and I win the e4 pawn by attacking the bishop. So here he plays in the best possible way. He does kingside castling. And I didn't want to do kingside castling because of bishop g5, which could happen. Actually, it's still the best move for black. I decided to play h6. He takes on e5, and that's my decisive mistake. I didn't sense the danger. I didn't spot the problem here. I didn't realize he was going to free the f2 pawn. Because I took with the knight, which might seem quite normal to retake with the knight here, but I faced the sequence knight takes, bishop takes for 4. I hadn't anticipated a 4. Bishop d6, e5 fork. Luckily, I have the check, but then I have the knight problem. As soon as it moves, there'll be bishop takes, f7 check, king takes, queen d5 fork. I lose my piece again. He gets his pawn back. I've lost castling rights. He'll have 4 pawns on the king side against 2. I'll have a very, very weak king. And then I enter into a downward spiral against me. I get out of it by a miracle. But then what should I have done about this capture on e5? Well, I had to take with the bishop. That changes everything. Now the computer gives an approximately equal position, because after knight takes, I attack the bishop. So he doesn't have time to play 4. He can play bishop b3, but I'll play d6, and after f4, knight c6. And e5 is no longer scary. I control the square twice. Plus, it could lead to an exchange of queens if the d column opens. And without the queens on the board, well, white won't be able to exploit their superior development, their development advantage, or their aggressiveness in the position. And then I have an extra pawn. This push to e5 will give me a second one. It's not good for white here, actually. So if white doesn't play e5, the position is considered by the computer to be roughly equal. That doesn't mean I won't have difficulties, right? I will, because if the computer says it's equal when white is a pawn down, it means there are still difficulties for black, right? I'd already made a video on the Evans Gambit on this push to b4, a fairly in-depth video actually, but the video is old and I'd never been played the Evans Gambit again, so I'd forgotten the different variations. Because it's true that against e4, I rarely play e5, so I'm rarely exposed to the Evans Gambit. Even never, almost never. My favorite defenses are c6, the Caro-Kann, c5, the Sicilian, e6, the French defense. And so against e5, you can find yourself facing an Evans Gambit, but I hadn't faced it for years, so I'd finally forgotten these variations because it's just not one of my popular defenses, quite simply. But having been in such great difficulty against a player not that highly rated compared to me, it shows humility and it made me progress. I've reviewed the variations and this time it'll be very, very fresh in my mind. I hope you enjoyed it too. You never learn as well as from a good defeat. In the end, I didn't lose, but for me, it's still a defeat in the opening. Well, I'll have progressed. I hope I've made you progress as well. You'll know how dangerous this Evans Gambit is, both offensively if you have white and defensively. You'll be alerted to the precision needed to defend yourself. You can leave me some comments, likes, share the video, support the channel. We'll meet again soon for new adventures on the chessboard. Goodbye, everyone.